The settlers, or pilgrims at Plymouth, experienced several adventures before finally succeeding in the northern parts of what becomes known as British North America. As Puritan Calvinists, they held religious beliefs that conflicted with the Church of England. Some of their key Reformed beliefs include sola scriptura, original sin, saved by grace, and predestination. After experiencing persecution for their religious beliefs, it was decided that it would be better to separate from the Church of England rather than purify it. For this reason, they were referred to as separatists. At the time, not being part of the Church of England or starting a new church was illegal. This resulted in increased persecution. Their first attempt to escape religious persecution by the Church of England so they could exercise their religious beliefs freely brought them to the religiously tolerant Netherlands, where they eventually found a home in Leyden, Holland. Although they did find religious freedom in the Netherlands, life was not easy. The separatists had to leave their homeland and friends to live in a foreign country without a clear idea of how they would support themselves. Something that made that difficult was that Dutch trade guilds excluded the migrants, so they were relegated to menial, low-paying jobs. Even worse was Holland's easygoing, cosmopolitan atmosphere, which proved alarmingly seductive to some of the saints' children. These young people were drawn away by evil example into extravagance and dangerous courses. Some of the older Dutch children even left their families to become soldiers and sailors for the Netherlands. Because of the threat that Dutch culture posed to their English identity and religious customs, and because they worried another war might break out between the Dutch and the Spanish, they decided to move again, this time to a place without government interference or worldly distraction, the New World, across the Atlantic Ocean. First, the separatists returned to London to get organized. A prominent merchant agreed to advance the money for their journey. The Virginia Company gave them permission to establish a settlement on the east coast between 38 and 41 degrees north latitude, roughly between the Chesapeake Bay and the mouth of the Hudson River. And the King of England gave them permission to leave the Church of England, provided they carried themselves peaceably. In August 1620, a group of about 40 saints joined a much larger group of secular colonists and set sail from Southampton, England, on two merchant ships, the Mayflower and the Speedwell. But the Speedwell was not speedy and it was not well. It began to leak almost immediately, and so the ships headed back to the port in Plymouth. The travelers squeezed as many as they could and their belongings onto the Mayflower. Finally, in September, the Mayflower set sail once again under the direction of Captain Christopher Jones. Because of the delay caused by the leaky Speedwell, the Mayflower had to cross the Atlantic at the height of storm season. As a result, their journey was horribly unpleasant. Many of the passengers were so seasick they could scarcely get up, and the waves were so rough that one of the sailors who horribly tormented the pilgrims was swept overboard. William Bradford says in his journal, "It was the just hand of God upon him." Although the Mayflower left with 102 passengers, with one dying in transit, they arrived in the New World with 102 passengers, as a child named Oceanus was born aboard the ship during the voyage. After braving the trip across the Atlantic Ocean so they could escape religious persecution and so they could spread the gospel to the lands unknown, they finally arrived in the New World in November of 1620. Although the Pilgrims had originally intended to settle near the Hudson River in New York, dangerous shoals and poor winds forced the ship to seek shelter at Cape Cod. Because it was so late in the year and travel around Cape Cod was proving difficult, the passengers decided not to sail further and to remain in New England. It was here, in Cape Cod Bay, that most of the adult men on the ship signed the document that we know today as the Mayflower Compact. This document was necessary to form a civil body politic as they were outside their allowed jurisdiction. This document served as a rudimentary constitution, influencing future constitutions in the New World. And, significantly, it expresses their purpose for coming to the New World. It says, quote, "having undertaken for the glory of God in the advancement of the Christian faith." That first winter proved very difficult, as about half of the passengers died, including, sadly, Oceanus. However, had they arrived here some years earlier, they would have been met by Pawtuxet Indians and would have found no place to settle. These Indians had murdered many white men who landed on their shores, but in 1617 a plague had mysteriously wiped them out. All except one, Squanto. And because of that, neighboring tribes were afraid to come near the place for fear that some great supernatural spirit had destroyed them. As a result, this turned out to be a relatively safe place for the Pilgrims. As for Squanto, in the words of William Bradford, Squanto was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. In fact, his life story is amazing in itself. In 1605, Squanto, a member of the Pawtuxet Indian tribe, was captured by an English explorer and taken to England. He remained there 9 years, during which time he learned to speak English. In 1614, Captain John Smith took him back to New England, but shortly after this he was again taken captive and sold into slavery at a port in Spain. Providentially, some local friars bought and rescued him, and then introduced him to Christianity. From Spain, he eventually went to England, where he remained until 1619, when he obtained passage back to his home in New England. As Squanto went ashore at what was to become Plymouth, he found his entire tribe had been killed by a plague. He was the only survivor of the Pawtuxet tribe. Joining himself to a nearby tribe, he remained there until the spring of 1621, when he joined himself with the Pilgrims, determining to see them survive at the place where his tribe had not. Although Squanto was an incredible help, the Pilgrims still struggled their first few years and experienced a starving time like Jamestown. Also like Jamestown, the Virginia Company owned all production, and so the first few years they exercised a communal economy. Bradford, seeing the error in this way, assigned plots of property and recognized property rights. As a result, the starving time ended as productivity increased.